Have that it is about time for us to get started tonight. Brother McKee's out of town. Isaac is going to have the class tonight. It'll be a little different. Over the summer, Isaac went on a mission trip, so we're going to let him give us a mission trip report, shall we say, as our class period. And so we're going to let Isaac have that this evening. Isaac, come on.
I'd like to start off by thanking the congregation for letting me come and do this. So I guess this whole thought of going on a mission trip started a while ago with me and my cousin, and we've gone to church camp for a long time together. We've done a lot together and very close to him, but that was just something we had always kind of wanted to do. And we always kind of figured that we would go with my granddad to Jos in Nigeria, where he travels most every year to do some mission work there. And so we started looking this summer about how we could get passports and whatnot. And we just kind of figured out that with school and whatnot, going to Jos would be very inconvenient. And another opportunity presented itself, and that was to go to Yucatan, Mexico. And this was because the church that my granddad attends, Cedar Grove, has supported a mission work in Yucatan for a long time. This work was started in the 80s, and it's going strong until now. Really, there were no churches in the Yucatan Peninsula before the 80s. There was a man there that converted the father of the man we went with, and through that, over 60 congregations have now been added to the Lord's church there in Yucatan. So no one had ever visited from the Cedar Grove congregation the work that was being done there, even though they supported it for a long time. So Justo, who was kind of our guide while we were there, had invited us all to come see what was happening there and to sort of see what we were supporting, or what the Cedar Grove congregation was supporting, that work there, see what it was about and what they were doing there, how the church operated there. So we departed July 6th. We drove up to Nashville and flew to Dallas-Fort Worth, and then flew from there to the Merida International Airport. This was our group that we went with. There's my dad, my cousin. The man beside my cousin is Justo. He was, again, sort of our guide throughout the whole thing. The lady next to him is his sister and her son, Obi. You can see my uncle behind her there. And the older gentleman beside the lady in the middle is Justo Sr., who is really the original convert, as far as we can tell, in the Yucatan area. And then there's me on the far right, I guess that would be. It's hard to tell with that. Then we have, this is the city that we stayed in. It's very central in Yucatan. It's Merida. And it's really the biggest city in the state of Yucatan. And to kind of give you an idea of where we were, you can kind of think of Mexico as like a J. We were at the very tip of the J there, and that was, again, the state of Yucatan. So we stayed in the city of Merida. Like I said earlier, that's where all the little roads are kind of going up towards there. And we would go sometimes 3 or 4 hours out of the city to visit congregations while we were there, just to see how some different works were being done. So the day after we landed, July 7th, we went and visited a Guatemalan refugee camp. This is where the government has taken people in and has given them some land. And on each, plot of land for each family, they'll make them like a slab that they can build a house on. As soon as they can, they will most of them, the men will work in farms, commercial farms around. But this was the church there, and we had a devotional with them, and after that handed out some groceries to them because we were told that that would be helpful. And after our devo with them, let me backtrack a little bit. I'm sorry. I'm very I don't want to say underprepared, but I've been very busy recently, so I'm doing the best I can. But excuse me. Let's keep going. So the members of the congregation there actually, after our devo and everything, invited us out to see their houses and to visit with them and whatnot. This was an example of what they had built on the slab that the government had provided them. This was a family that was very new, and so they were still living in sort of just a stick hut, basically. But the woman there is the daughter of the preacher, as far as I can remember. So the preacher at that congregation that we looked at just a minute ago, his daughter is the one living here at this house, and the preacher's grandkids there. And then this is the preacher's house there, and he actually has concrete walls because he's lived and worked there for longer, and he's been able to build up his house a little bit better. You may be able to see the bricks at the top, on the top of the house there, those cinder blocks there. Those are holding on a tin roof, and they're hoping to soon be able to put a concrete roof on their house so they're more protected when hurricanes come through. Because right now they have to leave and go to their neighbor's house whenever there's really bad weather. We can see here their kitchen and what they use to cook. That pile of rocks there is kind of like a fire pit that they cook on. They also had a little sort of camp stove, if you will, a little propane stove on the inside that I'm sure they used as well, and a little prep table and whatnot as well in that space. Then if you see that little wooden hut behind the man in the white hat, who is again Justo, that's their laundry room, and they had a little electric washer in there, which was really interesting to see. But several members of the community would go in there and use that. And again, all these little children, I believe, are grandchildren of the preacher there. So that was really neat to meet them and sort of get to know them a little bit. This was the community of Hool, as you can see on the sign there. And then we went on to our hotel.
You'll notice on the left the stroller. That's for about a 9-year-old boy that she carried over about a mile over the hill because he has palsy. And he's living in that house with 2 other siblings at least.
Yeah.
I think.
So
the older sibling is in the house that we first saw.
Yeah.
So she's got very few things in her house, but she got medicine for him to try to treat some of his medical conditions.
yeah, we saw her carrying around her son a lot, and she just carries him around on her hip, even though he's pretty old, but he can't walk. So that was an interesting story to hear. This little boy here has an interesting story as well. This is Obi, I believe, and that is Justo's nephew. Again, his sister's kid, Justo's sister's child. I'm sorry, this is probably hard to comprehend, but he has an interesting story of how he came to be and how he ended up where he is. Justo's sister would babysit for her neighbor often because she would have to go work with her husband, and she took very good care of the kids. She brought them to church every Sunday and whatnot. And the lady she was babysitting for saw how good a care she was taking of her children and knew that Justo's sister actually couldn't have a child. She was married, but just wasn't able. And so she promised that if she had another kid, she would actually give it to Justo's sister. And that's where Obi came from. And that's actually a story we heard more than once there, is if there was a couple that could not have children because of whatever the case may be, there was another example of a lady in a congregation that gave her child to another lady in the congregation because she could not have kids. It was very different from our society today in that way. This is, again, on July 8th. We had some time in the morning and we went to a local market, and we see on the left here a tortilla machine, which was really neat to see. They're cooking tortillas on this big thing, and it had a big, over the top of where the picture is, there was a big bowl of dough, and it filtered down into this. That was just one of my favorite parts of the whole trip, because I don't know, it fascinated me. And then on the other side here, we have the meat market, and they slaughtered beef and pork every day pretty much, and just had it hanging there. It's not refrigerated or anything, but that's how they do it there, and it works for them. So, what now? Yeah, I did. Well, I had some at a restaurant that they had handmade, and it was very good. But it was really neat to see how they did some of that commerce there.
That town was known for a certain style of eggs that's served all over. And I can't remember the name of the town. It's Huevos, where the town's name. It's a certain style. So above that was where they were serving that original style of eggs. So we got a little egg before we went to the church.
Yeah, it looked almost like salsa on top of eggs with also, maybe. It also had plantains on it, so I don't know. It was an interesting culinary experience, let me just say that. And in the corner of the picture here, you can see the front of a van. And that's another interesting part of our trip, is that we probably had about 7 vans throughout the trip. Because we rented like the nicest vans we could, but the first one, the air conditioning stopped working, so we had to take it back. And then the second one actually broke down at this market and would not start. And so we had to the church came and got us with their church bus. And yeah, it was something else. You could see the sky and the road at the same time. It was so rusty, you could just see right through it. And the passenger seat was held up with a piece of string. It was just kind of swinging. It was something else. I'll have to say that. No, no. But this is the inside of their building, and this is, you may be able to tell it's a little bit nicer than the first one we went to that was in the refugee camp. And this is a little bit closer to the city, so they probably had a little bit better jobs and whatnot, but they had fans and whatnot and other things that made it a little bit more comfortable. This is my uncle here preaching, and something we had to do because we don't speak Spanish is Justo had to translate for us the whole time. And so my uncle would say a couple sentences, and then Justo would translate that over. So it took a while, but it seemed like the message got across, and that was just something really neat to experience in that way. After that, we were still waiting on our van to be fixed. So we had some time to play some games with the youth there, which was pretty large. It was neat to see that. And we played a couple of different games, including. Was this a different one? Oh, okay. Yeah, so we had a busy day that day. We actually went to 2 congregations. I forgot about that. So that's what happens when you wait 3 or 4 months after to do your presentation. But yeah, we played a game where we played a couple different games. We actually played volleyball for several hours. You can see the lines on the ground, and we strung up a net, and that was really fun. We got to know some of those people there. So a few of them spoke English that they had learned in either school or university, and so they were kind of translating what we were saying to their friends, and it was really neat to get to know them and to see some other things there.
They had 2 languages too. Some
That's true.
more in the villages spoke more Mayan. Some towns spoke more Spanish.
Yeah,
We
we
seem to be a bilingual with both
Yeah.
of those languages.
so Husto's father, Husto Senior, who we saw back when I first showed a picture of our group, is the older gentleman. He spoke Mayan and Spanish. Justo, who was the fellow that we kind of got in contact with originally, speaks Spanish and English. So sometimes Justo, it would be like a 3-part translation where Justo would tell him what we said in Spanish, and Justo Senior would tell him what Justo said in Spanish in Mayan. So it was just it was quite the dynamic going on there. And then this is Sunday, July 9th, and you might think, what are we doing out here on Sunday? But the men at the congregation we were going to actually had to have to work every morning, so they had their services later in the evening. And so we had an open time slot, and we were able to go visit Chichen Itza, I think. I can't pronounce it, but it's a Mayan city from thousands of years ago. I'm thinking, I can't remember the timeline exactly there. But there was a lot of really neat buildings there. On this side, we have what they called the Temple of Warriors, I believe. And you see like what looked like columns sort of out in the front, and those represented different famous warriors and people that had accomplished great things. But those pillars, those rows of pillars, actually went on for a long ways past the temple. It looked like a quarter mile of those, representing important people to them at the time. Then we had the main pyramid. This is the unrestored side of it, because when they first discovered it, and the jungle had kind of taken over it, and it had deteriorated to this extent where the stairs are kind of falling off in some places and whatnot, but they restored the other side of it to what it originally looked like. And here's the other 2 like main buildings. There was a lot of little buildings that might have been, I don't know, offices or whatever. I don't know how that worked back then, but this was the observatory with the dome there, the big dome on the building, and that's where they would study the stars. And that's actually how this building was where they made the Mayan calendar. That's what I was told. And Justo, who used to be able to go up into all of these buildings, he was actually a tour guide before he moved to the U.S. To study. He was a tour guide at this site, so we really got the insider tour there because he knew all about it. But he used to be able to go in these buildings, and he said on the inside there was markings and a bunch of different things about how they studied the stars, and it was really neat to hear what he had to say about that. And then this other place, which looks like kind of a big pit, is actually a big sinkhole, and it had water in the bottom, and that's where they would sacrifice people. Sacrifice was a big thing to the Mayan people, and it was sort of a sacred part of their religion, if you will. They pulled tons of skeletons and all sorts of gold and stuff out of that hole. A couple hundred years ago, I think, is when they started doing that in the 1800s or something. But there's a lot of these sinkholes around, and they said that they had been able to figure out that some of them actually connected underground, even like 40 miles away. There was another sinkhole that attached to one of these. And so that was kind of interesting to see how all of that worked with some of the geology there, I guess is what you call it.
Go to different places, and that's the thing to do, is go swimming. Because they're way down in there, the water's very pure. If you look down in it, it's way, way down. Sinkhole was huge.
Yeah, it looked like half a football field. Yeah. Yeah.
Almost that deep down in.
Yeah. So you were falling a far ways if you were getting sacrificed into that thing, and then, you know, I wouldn't want to be there. But this was their ball court, and you can see these walls on each side, and each side has a hoop on it, and they would have this 7-pound rubber ball that they would have to hit with their elbow up. Probably, would you say that was 20 or 30 feet up into those hoops? Yeah, they couldn't use their hands, but they had to get that 7-pound ball. I don't know how they did either, but you know, if they didn't win, they were getting sacrificed. So I imagine they figured it out. You could see some markings on the side of it of some victors and what I assume was people that were famous at the time for their skill in that sport. And then this is just us in front of the main pyramid there. This is the last church we visited, and it was probably one of the most interesting to me. Something that I took away from most is some of the experiences I had with the congregation here. This is my granddad again getting his lesson translated by Justo, and we sang with him and prayed with him and did our whole church services. And then the normal preacher there did his presentation on the work that they're doing to the church building itself there. They're fortunate enough that their congregation has grown so much that they had to expand. And yeah. And that's something we just hear about in like the Bible is the people standing outside to hear the message, but this is it happening in real life. You can see some of it pretty full there. This was before everything got started. One thing I wanted to mention was that they actually had air conditioning at this congregation, but it wasn't on. I think they were I think they turned it on when it was like 110 when it got up to there. It's about when they turned it on. But they also were trying to save up for their new building. So that's probably, or for their expansion onto their existing building, which is probably why they were not having it running, to maybe save some money or something like that. Then we have, this is some of the construction that they're doing. This is actually the members themselves doing it because they can't afford to pay anyone to do it. And the men will just come after they finish work in the evening, and they seem to be pretty competent at it. And
This is, they're building concrete columns that are going to support the walls and the roof of this expansion. All this is mixed right there on the ground. The only thing they use to do this is buckets and shovels.
yeah.
Mixed it on the ground, and I didn't even see a wheelbarrow anywhere involved in any of it.
No, I think they were showing us in the preacher's presentation. They had what looked like a fireman line with just buckets, and they'd take them up and hand them off to the next person and pour them in that big trough they had made as a mold for their concrete. That was really neat to see how they worked together to achieve that. And this was actually, you can see a fella up there checking on if it had set yet so they could take the supports out from underneath it later. And the red wall on the side is the normal auditorium, so they're going to break through that wall and make it pretty much twice as big. You can also see what looks like sort of a secondary roof up there at the top of the building. That's where they had the classrooms and whatnot. for the youth, and I guess that's what they had, some older class. Yeah, that's true. They did have like sort of a secondary building on the other side, with a sort of a fellowship hall. Well, not really. It was more of just a kitchen, and you sat outside. But that's what they had. This picture with the tree in the background is actually taken on top of the roof of that place. We crawled past the air conditioner, and this fella gave us what he called guaya, which are Spanish limes, and that was an odd experience. He just told us to follow him. I couldn't understand what he was saying, but I went up on top of the building with the guy, and he gave me these things, and they were neat. You cracked open the shell of it a little bit, and there was a big old pit inside with a flesh on the outside, and you just kind of cracked it open and took the whole thing and tried to get the flesh off the pit and spit the pit out. And they were pretty good. They were just odd. I don't know. But that was one of my, I don't know. Yeah. It was interesting. Anyway, this guy had a very interesting story of how he was converted. The story starts out with him robbing one of the members here at Knife Point, who was a street vendor, and he took a bag of coins from him and ran off.
I always hear coin first, when change it. Right, we'll look at whatever came out, so.
Yeah. And a little while later, a couple days later, maybe weeks, I don't know, the man that was the street vendor, the member of this congregation that was stolen from, sees this man coming back down the street and gets real worried. You know, is he going to rob me again? What is going on here? But it turns out that the vendor had left a Bible in that sack that he kept his coins in, and this man had sort of figured out that what he was doing was wrong through study or just, yeah, whatever. And through some study and whatnot, he was eventually converted and seems to be a faithful member at this congregation, which was a very interesting story to me because, I mean, God works in mysterious ways, I guess. And then July 10th, we were scheduled to depart early in the morning. So we got up and went through customs at the little airport there and waited and waited and waited. And our flight was eventually canceled just in time for us to book a hotel for the night. And so we got to stay one more night and go ahead and leave. I took this picture because I took a bunch of these pictures because it was just interesting to me. I like cars, but they had some interesting vehicles there that I'd never seen something like that before. They had, I think they call this a ute, or that's what the Australians call it, but they had these in Mexico. There were VW Beetles from the 1960s, and they produced the same model up into like the 2000s because they had no emissions standards and whatnot there. And that was just an interesting thing to me. But I think one point that I wanted to that maybe you take away from this is that the church is growing there, and they are seem to be doing good things. They went from 0 congregations in the 80s up into 60 now. Was that 40 years ish? I'm bad at math. Yeah, okay, that's good. So that's just very encouraging to me to see that. Most other things you would see there were Catholic cathedrals and whatnot, but it seemed like the church was growing there very rapidly. And that goes back to the Great Commission to me. You know, it says in Matthew chapter 28, verse 16 through 20. I'm paraphrasing here, but go out and baptize and bring people into the church for the most part. So it just seems like they really have that spirit, and they are evangelizing and reaching out and really doing what they should be. So we just need to remember that. And maybe that's why their church is growing so much there. That's pretty much all I have for you tonight. I can answer some questions, or we can go ahead and move on to the invitation, or our little, I guess, Devo. Do we have a Devo tonight? Yeah, okay. So we can go ahead and do that if no one has any questions. All right. Thank you.